Alright, so recording back now in Portland, and now getting a little experimental with this, as got the dead zone going. So Sunday nights, from 6 to 8 p.m. on WRHU.org, I have a show called The Dead Zone. And it's an exploration of the music of the Grateful Dead. And unfortunately, because I'm in Maine now, and well, it's unfortunate from the point of view of the show, I don't get to do as many live shows, and I am not able to record as many new shows as I did in the past. But that's okay, actually, because a lot of the shows that now are being replayed on the air are shows that only played once. So it's a nice way to go back and listen to shows that I recorded in the past. And in the background, this show that I'm playing right now.
Oh. Hi, Daddy.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Anyway, this is Jamie, and Jamie's on the TV now. But anyway, so I went, as we know, as I documented the last 2 days. Yesterday, actually the last 3 days I recorded in Chicago. So the cool thing about the Dead Zone coming on the air is that my colleague John Mullen, who is one of the head honchos of the WRG, will schedule shows for me, picking from the archives of the shows that I've done. And I'd listen to say, okay, what's going to happen? And here's the beautiful coincidence. This show that we're listening to in the background it's from Chicago. This is from Chicago, and that's such a coincidence. It's an amazing coincidence that I had to spontaneously start recording the meditation while the Dead Zone from Chicago, Grateful Dead from Chicago, is on. So, maybe a little messy, maybe a little loud in the background, but here we go. So yesterday early morning, before I undertook my 10-hour plus trip from downtown Chicago to Portland, Maine, it was a long, long day. It was not an easy one. Taking a long train ride to the airport, and then from the airport, waiting a bit, and then taking a plane to Boston, and then waiting forever for a bus, and then a bus to Portland. But when I last recorded, which was, again, I'm a day behind, because what I'm about to read was actually written on March the 1st. But in 2004, it was a leap year. So what I read yesterday was from February the 29th. And I either have to catch up today or tomorrow, but one of these days, I'm going to have to catch up to get back on date. So I'm a day behind, so to speak, even though numerically I'm on, I'm caught up, so to speak. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the meditation I'm about to read, which I believe is number 17 or 18, I lost count, is exactly the 18th one that I wrote back in 2000, or 17th or 18th one I wrote back in 2004. But the date of its being written is a day behind, if that makes any sense. So actually, in explaining it, I realized that I really can't ever catch up. I'll always be a day behind. And not right now because of the sort of craziness of this Dead Zone from Chicago going on while I'm recording this. I think I'll do a musing on what it means to be behind. Because so much of this work of being and learning is about being ahead, right? So turning around, being turned around is the emphasis of my writing and my work, and of sort of the core of thinking, as I understand it, is the gaze towards the future, the not yet. And to this day, that's a very important focus for me, with the leap being the sort of dominant category in that. So the notion that you're a day behind, that we're actually lagging, right, that we're in our proper gaze towards the future, we remain behind. It's very interesting, and I think that I'm going to take that up perhaps tomorrow. I have to meditate on that and reflect on that before I do it. Not tonight. Tonight is about the dead zone going on, simultaneity of the dead zone from Chicago, coming back from Chicago, and reading the next meditation. So the next meditation, it picks right up with where I left off yesterday. And where I left off yesterday was with the introduction of Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. And actually, Karl Jaspers. I'm pausing because this glory is just too good. I don't even know how this is going to translate, but all right. Lower that a little bit. So,
if everybody can listen up just a minute. While we take
the Dead, I may not be a huge fan of Chicago, but they obviously were quite fond of the town, and, you know, it's noteworthy that's the last show they ever played was in Chicago. So anyway, back to the meditation. Yesterday, the meditation introduced for the first time Lao Tzu, and actually Karl Jaspers. Now, I didn't mention, I mean, I read Jaspers' quote, that his sort of interpretation of the Tao. And one of the sort of less known influences, or the one that I don't talk about as much, on this project was Karl Jaspers, who was professor, philosophy, important but not major. You know, he's not a household name in the way that Heidegger is. Heidegger was his contemporary, and Heidegger was also professor of Hannah Arendt. She wrote her dissertation under Jaspers after she had a sort of falling out, not falling out with Heidegger, but the affair that she was having with Heidegger just put her in such a place that she couldn't continue. Jaspers wrote a 2-volume book on the history of philosophy, and he includes it. They're very thin, sort of short lectures. I believe they were lectures he gave on the radio, which is, again, kind of an apropos moment to talk about that, given that my radio show is on in the background. But these lectures that he gave sort of to a general audience in Germany took up figures that are not normally taken up in Western philosophy or in courses of philosophy, including, amongst those were the Buddha, Jesus, Nagarjuna, who was an important Indian philosopher, as well as Lao Tzu. So he did these lectures, and they're very just sort of straightforward, exegetical analyses of the primary text, including the Tao Te Ching. But those 2 short books by Jaspers definitely influenced and gave me what I like to say the license to take up, not that I needed a license, that would kind of goes against the spirit of the experiment, but it's important to know who influences you, and rather it's important to share those who influence you, and Jaspers is one. So okay, so this meditation picks up right where the last one let off, and the last place we left off was talking about the Tao. I quoted the Tao to return to its destiny. It's called the eternal Tao. And then I said the leap into the mystery of our relationship with being is the destiny of learning. So I played with this Lao Tzu's idea of being on the destiny, being returning to the destiny to being with the Tao, and then talked about our destiny of learning being the relationship with being, our mysterious relationship with being. Our destination, then, playing with the idea of destiny, in our seeking, is the impossibility of learning of finding oneself in the midst of the circulation of being. Okay, so that's where I pick it up in the meditation from 03014701, now in the state of belatedness. The impossibility of our relationship, I'm going to turn the music off so I can just read it without that in the background. The show off, rather. The possibility of the relationship designates the futility of our relationship. But to say this is to understand the condition of learning, the essence of our relationship with being, as useless in the instrumental sense. Futility can designate a phenomena, especially an act, as unimportant, frivolous, or ineffective. Indeed, seen from the perspective of the willing judging subject, the leap into the mysterious, the unknown, and unknowable, because it can never be fully grasped, into the circulation of that which reveals and conceals, appears and disappears, this act of willing non-willing is futile and being useless. Measured from the standard of commodification, which defines value in terms of its tradability, its capacity to be bought and sold, this relationship as a relationship is valueless. But how can we see from the perspective of the relationship? How does it stand from within this relationship? To approach these questions, we must look more carefully at the way in which the tidings have reposed us, have placed us in the location of questionableness, and thereby have pushed us off the highway of reason and off the beaten path. We leap off this path and onto unmarked trails. In learning, we become seekers. How do we find our way? Where do we go, and what draws us or moves us? The question, how does it stand from within the relationship with being, is reposed as the question concerning our destination, the way we proceed. The Tao is helpful here as a name which serves to designate the appearance of being, its shining forth, as both a path and destination, as instruction. If learning is said to be the essence of our relationship with being, then we must stay close to this relation, lest we fall back into the talk of the ultra as an other. Alterity is the condition of learning as the mystery which is always already with us in our seeking. Learning unfolds on the unmarked paths of seeking. These paths are pregnant with possibility. Being is thus not a something that we are in relationship with. For if this were the case, then indeed we would stand against and before being, which we could potentially seek to control. Again, this is the attitude of the willing judging subject who has made the decisive choice to bear down on the tidings of the tide. Thus, the question that asks how does it stand within this relationship is one that can only be explored by making an inquiry into the relationship as a way of proceeding. This way is both a where and a how. The thrust of our description of learning has been a focus of comportment, attitude, of being in the world. It is a focus on the way we are as learners. To ask about this relationship is to ask, how is it going? In a common sense manner in which one will ask a friend how things stand in relationship to a project they have undertaken, or a significant relationship that for the moment defines so much of who they are. This colloquial phrase is deeply philosophical in its pointing toward our being in the world as one of relations that are always ongoing. This going on of our being identifies our being as a happening, an event. When we inquire about the going, we understand that our friend is in the midst of a relationship that is unfolding. We don't put the question in terms of a singular place they're headed, but focus instead on the manner in which it is moving. The how, the where, and the how of the event are linked to the overlap, are linked and overlap. The where and the how of the event are linked and overlap, and the relationship is the matter at hand. One is within this relationship, and it is impossible to address it as an object that stands outside or against it. The speaking of and about this relationship is always already a further manifestation of this relationship. That is why speaking, naming, our language is the crux of learning. This is precisely why we identify this phenomena of evocative speech as capturing both the address and response of learning. This is why the voice of learning is heard and expressed in the silence of the juridical voice. Evocative speech expresses the standing now, the going on of this relationship with being, this learning. Thus, with evocative speech, we respond to the first question, how is it with the nothing, by saying, it goes with learning. Let's further explore this unmarked trail of learning by asking another provocative question that follows from, how stands it with the nothing? The question we might ask would be, where does being hide? Let's indicate another ontological difference, the difference between being and the being beyond being. This is the no thing, the nameless. Let's name this nameless the beyond. And the being we have been speaking of, the being that shines forth in our horizon of beings, catches and throws us and leads us into the profound mystery of learning which proposes us, we shall call the way. Lao Tzu is instructive here when he makes the distinction between the way, which we have been calling the path of learning upon which we leap, and the Tao, which remains without name. Quote, the Tao that can be trodden on is not the enduring and unchanging Tao. The name that can be named is not the enduring and unchanging named. Conceived of as having no name, it is the originator of heaven and earth. Conceived of as having a name, it is the mother of all things. Always without desire we must be found. If its deep mystery we would sound. But if desire always within us be, its outer fringe is all that we shall see. Under these two aspects, it is really the same, but as development takes place, it receives its different names. Together we call them the mystery, where the mystery is the deepest, the gate of all is subtle and wonderful. And that's where it ends. Now, I have to call to attention the fact that there's a quotation here. I'll sort of see if I can get it on tape. This part here, these are two quotations from Jaspers and his reading of the Tao, and then these lines here in lyric are Lao Tzu's. So it's Jaspers who talks about the distinction between the Tao that is without a name, the nameless, and the Tao that is, which is the originator of heaven and earth, and then the Tao that has a name that is the mother of all things, and then the citation of Lao Tzu, and then more Jaspers. And he calls them, together we call them the mystery, where the mystery is the deepest, is the gate of all that is subtle and wonderful. And I'm not going to muse on this right now, but now looking back and reading this quotation from Jaspers, where he says, the mystery, together of the two names of the Tao, that mystery is the deepest, where it is the deepest is the gate of all that is subtle and wonderful. And I think that's it's really very evocative. It's provocative because of my interest in the threshold and the portal. And the movement, right? So the movement of learning begins when we move through this portal into the open region. So this was I talked a couple days ago about those meditations where I'm in the zone, and tonight I started literally in the dead zone, and some of the meditations where I'm sure when I sat down to write it, it was a grind. I mean, I was talking when I was reflecting on the difference between those writings. I was reflecting on how the zone is always there. You know, one either finds it or one finds oneself in it, or one doesn't. What I'm writing about when I talk about the relationship with being and learning is precisely that place where, which you might call the zone, right? So it's beyond this gate that I was just referring to. That one stumbles into it, or is thrown into it, or finds oneself into it, this remains the mystery. I tried to write my way into it, so to speak, or I tried and hoped every day when I sat down to do the experiment that I would find that space, but it didn't always happen. This particular meditation from March the 1st, 2004, again, we're a day behind because of the leap year that was 2004, I was definitely in the zone. And so what I liked about this and what I found really cool, and a couple things here. One of them is obviously this emphasis on now talking about the relationship as a movement, and I think this may be the place where I really take off on this idea of, pun intended, on this idea of the relationship between being and learning being a movement. It wasn't until years later, in fact I think it was last year, the year before, that after reading many years of reading Heidegger, and particularly the very short piece, this lecture he gave at this theological seminary called The Concept of Time. It was only recently that I came to realize that for Heidegger, this being in time means the ways of moving. It's about movement. And it's kind of an Aristotelian idea that time is really a movement. And it's the way we move in time. The way, for example, we walk across a room, walking from the living room into the kitchen. Maybe we're bouncing. Maybe we're shuffling. That's because my wife is now jumping. Everyone's involved in tonight's meditation. Jaime came on screen. Now Kelly came into the discussion. So it's, in other words, that time is defined by the way that we move, right? And so and the mood that we're in is part of movement. So movement isn't always just the physical movement of our bodies, but it's the way that we're sort of stirred, or the way we're stirring. So we could talk about mood as a kind of movement, right? And so this idea of time as movement is something I didn't really articulate back when I was writing this meditations, but it's the notion of movement, the idea that that the relationship between being and learning is one of a movement, and a particular kind of movement that really takes off at this point. I think because of Lao Tzu and how he sort of pushes me to really write about the way, right? So the Tao is the way, capital W. Something that I write about here is the idea of moving off the well-trodden path. That's a kind of Heideggerian thing, and into the untrodden paths, what I call the unmarked trails. All of that is inspired by hiking and skiing. So something I like to do is to ski in the woods when I'm at in ski places, and go into these areas where there are trees, but they call them the glades, where you can ski in between the trees. There are marked areas, but also unmarked areas. I've gotten in trouble for doing that a couple times. And also hiking through trails. Like today, we went on a hike in Freeport, and we got off the main trail for a while, and Jaime led us that way. So this is an important idea. The idea that learning is the moving off the main trail is an exciting and an interesting part, I thought, of this particular meditation, because it really starts to get into the whole, being and learning, the relationship is one where you're taken into a place you've never been before. That's the core of learning. That's a very common sense way of thinking about learning, but I don't think that we think about this enough. The idea that when we're learning, we're in relationship with something we don't know. I notice that a lot with Jaime, who made his cameo appearance before, because he'll see like the number 12, and like on Sesame Street, for example, and he doesn't know what it is, so they'll flash it on the screen, and he's just looking at it, and I think about, wow, he's in a relationship with this symbol 1 and 2 together, which he might recognize 1, he might recognize 2, but together they form something, and he doesn't say 1 and 2, he just sort of stares at it silently, right? And so the silence really is a very common sense experience we have with encountering things that we don't know, because we don't have language for it, and we don't have the and so not having language for it, we're silent. And so learning that I'm talking about is the essence of this moment where we don't have language, and we're encountering something that's completely new, and it's a mystery to us, and it's that moment that we're in learning. And it's a very commonsensical experience, but we forget about it as adults in particular, and as adult learners, and working with college students even, and students beyond college, because we've really lost that raw experience of just looking at something like the number 12 and having no language for that. But existentially speaking, that all is just an example for the bigger picture, which is life itself. Right? I mean, that's the core of what I'm talking about here, is that we stand in this relationship with our own life, silent, because we don't know what's coming ahead of us. And that brings us back to this idea of belatedness, of looking ahead, but always being behind that future. Right? I mean, that's the belatedness. So standing a day behind in the calendar, so to speak, but with the actual meditation, this is a sort of experience of belatedness. That we know something's coming next, and we look towards that, but we're behind it, and it's still to arrive. Okay, well, I think I'm going to wrap it up here, because I'm concerned that my battery's going to run out on my computer, and I won't be able to save it. So I'm going to stop recording now, and let's see if we can. No, the dead zone is not back on. So anyway, this is the end of, I think it's PPM18, recorded March 2nd, and it's Groundhog Day. So that's interesting. Maybe the fact that it's Groundhog Day. No, it isn't. I'm looking at the calendar. It says February. Yeah, it's still February on this calendar over here. It's March the 2nd. It's not Groundhog. I'm not crazy. I might be crazy, but I know that it's March 2nd. Originally written March the 1st, did meditation, but read and commented on March the 2nd, 2014.